everybody, welcome back to Jessica's Reading Room. My name is Kim and we are here with another video book review, and today we are going to be talking about Asylum, Inside the Closed World of State Mental Hospitals, photographs by Christopher Payne with an essay by Oliver Sacks. And yes, this is a little odd because this is one of those coffee table picture books that you pick up and while you're visiting someone else's house and you're just looking through the pictures, and that's pretty much what these are famous for. But you know what? I read it. There's an essay and there's a foreword and an afterword, and so I sat down and I read it and I was like, oh my gosh, what? Because it's about asylums. I mean, are you surprised by that? If you are, then you're new here. And if you're not new here, then you shouldn't be surprised. Okay, and I'm not even actually going to hold that up the whole time because it's heavy, because it's a big coffee table book, okay? Anyway, so I got that book for Christmas. My mother got it for me. And I mean, Christmas Day, I opened it up and I was flipping through all the pictures. The pictures themselves are awesome. You get these shots from abandoned hospitals all over the country. I was really excited because actually right down the road in Goldsboro, North Carolina, we have Cherry Hospital, which is I believe it's still technically a short-term psychiatric hospital, but it used to be one of those long-term state asylums. And so, but no one will go take a tour with me. I don't know why. It's not abandoned. I mean, I'm literally asking if we can go on a tour, but no one will go with me. So I don't know. But I was really excited to see pictures from Cherry Hospital in this book. I was like, oh my gosh, geek out. Ah, okay. Because I geeked out through the whole thing, but I just geeked out especially hard when I saw that. Okay, so the main part of this book to read is the essay by Dr. Oliver Sacks. He is a world-renowned neurosurgeon who actually worked in the New York hospital system, focusing mainly on psychiatry and neuroscience, neurosurgery. We're talking about working back in the 50s when all of this is happening. So, I mean, he's there in this, golden age, and yet not actually golden age, in a lot of ways, actually really bad age of state hospitals. But it gives him a really good perspective on all of this. Who better to talk to than a doctor who actually worked in some of these state hospitals? And his theories, I was actually really surprised about, because that if you're going to sit there, the American mental asylum has just become this thing to be feared. You hear all these stories of these hospitals where they had the capacity for 700, but then at one time they housed 2,000 patients. They didn't have the actual building capacity. They certainly didn't have enough staff. All these patients who are living in their own filth, running around naked, defecating on themselves, just being generally unsupervised and untreated. I mean, for crying out loud, you've got things like American Horror Story, who did an entire season on an asylum, with it ending exactly that same way. These ideas that psychiatric hospitals are places of abuse, of neglect, in some ways, of these barbaric practices with lobotomies and electroshock and, in some cases, maybe even experimentation. And some of these horror stories and horror books that, we all love to read, they're haunted. These doctors who have come in and they're going to experiment on their patients, and they're basically, kind of the same thing that the Nazis did in the concentration camps, only with medical patients, these mental patients. And so I was really shocked when I started reading, and Dr. Sacks was actually in very, very pro state hospital, as long as they're done right. I mean, I'm sitting here and I'm reading this and I'm like, really? You still have your medical degree? You mean to tell me that the American Association of Physicians and the medical boards and the American I don't know, association of psychiatrists and neurosurgeons and, you know, all of these people, you know, you have an opinion like that and you're, you know, you're still allowed to practice medicine? What? But the things that he said, I mean, again, they made so much sense. And I realize that I'm totally going to descend into this expose on the problems with America's mental health system. And I know, and I'm sorry, okay, but I kind of have to because we're talking about it. You know, and it's not like I don't have any experience, you know, because Ivan and I have had this conversation so many times. You know, he works in the emergency department. And if there's anyone who actually supports the idea of reopening state hospitals and asylums, it's Ivan. And, you know, we've had conversations because, you know, he very much likes the idea that all of these poor people, you know, they're walking around the streets homeless. You know, well, oh, they could take a pill. What homeless person is going to keep up with their, you know, with their prescription? And of all things, a schizophrenic, a paranoid schizophrenic? What paranoid schizophrenic is going to keep up with their medication if they're not actually required to? It doesn't make any sense. And, you know, we sit there and we have these conversations, you know, about, well, what about their constitutional rights? How are you going to be able to do that? You have people who are constantly trying to take advantage of things like involuntary commitment, where you have these people who don't agree with the way their relatives are living. So they literally try to have them committed to a short-term psychiatric facility. And it's like, what? But what Dr. Sachs does is he actually narrows down a lot of the practical problems that happened with these asylums back, especially in the 50s, 60s, 70s, when, you know, they all actually began closing. He talked about how, you know, the introduction of antipsychotics, how, you know, everyone rushed into this idea that a pill is going to solve mental illness, that medication is actually going to heal, you know, these people's mental problems. And he said the problem is that everyone jumped on it so fast that they didn't give it a chance to not work. They just assumed it was going to work, when in reality, especially antipsychotics, they're not guaranteed by any means. And so he said, you know, people started to rely so heavily on medication that, you know, they decided to close down the asylums because they weren't needed, when in reality, they still didn't know. And then, so sorry, I aspirate when I get all excited and start talking fast. But the one thing that he talked about, which never actually really occurred to me, but it was kind of the death knell of state hospitals, and that is funding. Again, it was really fascinating because, you know, we all hear the stories that, of course, you know, they barely had enough money to keep up the existing buildings, let alone build more to house more patients. They didn't have enough money to pay existing staff, let alone trying to hire more who could actually come in and help care for these patients. But why exactly did that happen? And it was a very interesting thing because, you know, he talked about the Kirkbride system, Dr. Kirkbride up at Danville State Hospital? Danville? Because there's a Danvers and there's a Danville. And I can never, ever tell the difference between the two because one is in Massachusetts and one is in somewhere else. Okay, all right, I'm gonna figure it out. So I'm so incredibly sorry to all of these people who are from Pennsylvania and Massachusetts, and nobody actually knows the difference between the two because I mean, we went to that one. Oh gosh, of course it's not actually in here when I need it. Typical. Why does this always happen, guys? I don't even know. Because Ivan and I actually went to go visit the one that's in Massachusetts, right outside of Salem. Okay, Danvers State Hospital is in Massachusetts. Okay, and Danvers is the one that I went to. I'm sure there are going to be plenty of people out there who know more about this, who are actually going to be able to help me out with this. Okay, I don't know. All right, okay, we're going to say Danvers. Danvers is the one that's right outside of Salem. I've actually been there. I saw the facade that they were able to keep. They have turned it into apartment buildings. They actually did put up a memorial to the hospital, to the staff, and to the patients, and the cemetery is still there. It's actually relatively well cared for. And I mean, I thought that was really, really cool. But anyway, so Dr. Kirkbride actually came up with this system of, a main administration building and then dormitories and staff quarters kind of spreading out from it. And for a long time, they had this idea of moral therapy, moral treatment, which I know that kind of sounds, oh my gosh, moral. So are you trying to say that sins are considered mental illness? No. Calm down. That's not it. It was really something as simple as, this old Puritan idea of hard work. Idle hands are the devil's workshop. This idea that if you actually allow these people to work, give them tasks, give them order, because that's kind of what mental illness is you're missing order in your head. You've got all of this chaos and all of this disorder that if you give them order outwardly, it will help with the mental illness. So you have these asylums who are basically these whole working communities with farms, crops, livestock, dairy farms, carpenters, sewing rooms. This idea of keeping the patients busy and keeping them out in the fresh air, keeping them engaged to where they get to be distracted from the chaos that's happening in their brains. And then all of a sudden, typical, in walks Congress, who all of a sudden cares about the rights of the patients, and that obviously these asylums are exploiting these patients and making money off of them. No. So they weren't allowed to actually do this moral therapy anymore. Well, the only problem is that this moral therapy was the way that these asylums were actually paying for themselves. You had the things that the patients actually made that were being taken out into the community and sold. The milk from the dairy farms, the eggs from the chickens, the crops that were being cultivated, the things that the carpenters were making, the clothes that the women were sewing, dolls, all of these things that were being made were being taken out into the community and they were sold, and those funds were being put back into the asylum and actually paying for the room and board of the patients. So there was no need for state funding if they were already paying for themselves. Well, no, we can't allow that because, oh my gosh, government has to walk in, and if the government doesn't start regulating, well, then what's the point of government? And like every other thing government gets involved with, they ruined it. So now none of the patients were actually able to do any of this work. So what did they do? They descended into the chaos of their minds because they ended up sitting in the day room in front of the TV behind barred windows, and what? So their brains turned to mush. And then the state starts complaining, oh, we don't have enough money to give to you, sorry. So there you go. There's the main, the practical problem with asylums and how they just ran out of funding. And and again, it's the kind of stuff that totally makes sense too. Oliver Sacks actually started talking about how there is documentation of these patients who have written stuff down and said, you know what, honestly, without this place, where would I go? Where would I be if I wasn't at this hospital where I'm protected from everyone else and everyone else is protected from me? And it's just sad. It's sad that a system like asylums and state hospitals, which actually have this potential for so much good, ended up being shut down. And in reality, there's really nothing that can replace them. Oh my gosh, there's pills. Yeah, because that's working really well. That's working really well, guys. Great, thanks. Anyway, so yes, all of this from a coffee table book where normally you would just sit and look at the pictures. And yes, the foreword and the afterword were actually written by the photographer, talking about how he was able to go into all of these places, take these photographs, getting permission from the state, unfortunately having to see so many of them being torn down, so many of them actually being converted to things like apartments and condos. And those are the lucky ones, you know, others that are just completely torn down altogether, which is awful because we're talking about some of the great architecture that, I mean, it ends up looking like castles on a hill, but in reality, it's the state hospital. I mean, it's just, I was just shocked. All that to say, I mean, it threw me into this philosophical conundrum, and all from a coffee table book where you're literally just supposed to look at the pictures. So I would suggest that everyone actually go and sit down and read this. And if you have coffee table books, then you should probably sit down and read what those coffee table books have to say, because you'll probably learn a lot. I know I did. So yes, so I actually gave this book 5 stars out of 5. The photographs are amazing. Like I said, just sitting there and reading Dr. Sax's perspective, I just thought it was great. I learned a lot. I thought it was awesome. So there you go. All right, if you have actually read this coffee table book, I would love to hear your opinion on it down in the comments. If you love asylums and state hospitals like I do, then I would love to sit and discuss that with you too. If you have suggestions for books that are about state hospitals and asylums, I would love to hear it. So yes, all right, you guys, thank you so much for watching, and we will see you with our next video review, book, oh my gosh. We will see you next time with our next video book review. Bye.